I've never been one for sappy goodbyes or overthinking life's twists and turns. Amelia, 35, manager. Those titles spoke for themselves. There I stood, suitcase in hand, my palms sweaty as I gripped it tight. The creak of the stairs under my weight felt like the soundtrack to my not-so-graceful exit. At the bottom, Jeremy leaned against the door frame, arms folded, a ghost of a smirk on his face. That smirk screamed, "You won't last a week without my money," and I despised it. Linda, the queen of passive-aggressive comments, perched on the arm of the plush love seat, her throne of judgments and sly digs. "My boy always did like them headstrong," she said, inspecting her perfectly manicured nails. So, the new trophy wife looked like a humanized Barbie, perched awkwardly on the edge of the couch, with her legs crossed so tight I wondered if she could feel her toes. "I packed my things," I said, keeping my voice steady though my insides churned. It felt strange declaring something so mundane in a moment that marked the end of an era. Jeremy chuckled, an infuriating sound. "What? No tears, Amelia?" he prodded, finding humor in what he thought was my misery. Typical Jeremy, kicking when he thought you were down. "Not for you," I shot back, clenching my jaw to keep my composure. Linda's laugh slithered out sharp as a knife. "Why don't you join us for dinner one last time?" Her eyes challenged me, daring me to break. The idea was ludicrous. Who in their right mind would have a farewell dinner with their ex and his shiny new toy? I couldn't resist showing them I wasn't leaving as the defeated wife. "Sure," I said, surprising even myself. "Could be fun." Zoe's eyes shot up in surprise, not expecting me to accept. Jeremy's smirk faltered. "Great," he said. "I'll get the wine." It was his white flag, his last attempt at playing the courteous host. Linda sniffed, turning to Zoe. "Dear, why don't you help Jeremy with the wine?" "The good stuff upstairs. You remember where it is," she said, sending Zoe off like a child on an errand. As Zoe scampered off, I noticed her heels were too high, her steps uncertain. Poor girl was walking on stilts, trying to measure up in a world where the bar was set impossibly high. "It's going to be a long night," I mumbled under my breath, realizing this dinner was more of a chess game than a meal. Every word would have to be calculated if I wanted to walk out with my head held high. In the dining room, an awkward tension hung in the air, contrasting with the clinking sound of cutlery. Linda, sitting at the head of the table, smirked as she turned towards me. "Enjoy the meal, darling. It's not every day you sit down to something that hasn't been microwaved." I fixed a smile, keeping my tone even. "Thanks, Linda. It's been hard to find time between work hours. Not like I've got the luxury to stay home." Across from me, Jeremy stirred in his seat, a hint of red creeping up his neck. "I'm on it, you know. Jobs don't just fall out of the sky. The last place didn't know a good worker when they saw one." I couldn't help but laugh. "A good worker, Jay. They practically threw you out. How much was it you cost them?" "A couple thousand." So her curiosity piqued, forked a salad leaf, not eating, just poking. "A few thousand," she echoed. Jeremy's jaw tensed, his hand tightening around his knife. That was blown way out of proportion. I made a small mistake. Amelia was just looking for someone to blame. Jeremy muttered, "I guess being late most days and missing deadlines is small now," I said coolly, taking a sip from my glass. Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Well, accidents happen, right? But Zoe, dear, you must be careful. Clumsiness can run in the family." Zoe gave a tight-lipped smile, her eyes fixed on her plate. "I believe everyone has a bad day now and then, right, Jeremy?" she said. Jeremy shot a glance at Zoe, then back at me, desperate to change the subject. "Let's not dwell on the past. I'm focusing on the future." "Sounds grand, Jay, hopefully. This time the future doesn't have a repeat ending," I said, leaning back in my chair. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Linda cleared her throat, signaling a subject change. "So any plans after today, dear, once you pack up?" I glanced around the table, my resolve firm. First, a good night's sleep in months, I reckon. So finally put down her fork and looked up, a flash of something, pity, maybe, or curiosity, in her eyes. "Sounds nice, actually." Jeremy, eager for an ally, turned to Zoe. "Babe, tell Amelia about the job you were mentioning." Zoe nodded, a spark of enthusiasm in her voice. "Oh, it's nothing much, just an opening in the admin department. Might be something for you to look at." I looked at her, really looked, and saw something genuine. "Thanks, Zoe. I might just take a look at that." The meal continued, the earlier sparks of tension drowned out by mundane chatter. The clinking of cutlery against plates filled the room as Linda kept eyeing me like a hawk, waiting to swoop down with another snarky comment. "So, tell me," she said, leaning back with a smirk, still living out of that tiny apartment. I pushed my salad around my plate, barely suppressing a smile. "Actually, Linda, I'll be moving soon. Got a little place closer to work now. It's mine." Jeremy choked on his drink, coughing into his napkin while his mom's eyebrows shot up. "You? A house? Where'd you get that sort of cash?" he sputtered. "Well, if you'd asked me anything about my life in the past year," I said, cutting into my steak, "you'd know about the money Grandma left me. All 700 kvet." His greedy eyes widened, dollar signs practically flashing in them. "Wait, that's half mine." Jeremy blurted, his fork clattering onto his plate. His mother chimed in like clockwork. "Absolutely, Jeremy. Married means shared assets." I leaned back and laughed. "Funny how you'd forget the prenup you shoved in my face. What's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, wasn't it?" Zoe, sitting next to Jeremy with a plate of untouched food, looked at him with a mix of shock and was that disgust. Poor thing probably didn't sign up for this soap opera. Jeremy's face turned tomato red. "That's before I knew you were coming into money," he shouted. I took another bite, savoring not just the meal, but the moment. "I guess that's just tough luck," I said, giving him a wink. Zoe's eyes darted between us, clearly regretting her pick for the night, maybe for more than just tonight. And Jeremy. He was in full tantrum mode now. His napkin threw him down with a dramatic flourish. "You know what? This is crap. You can't just—" "Oh, but I can." I cut him off, and it seems like I just did. Dinner went on, and with every petty jab they threw, I parried with the ease of someone with nothing to lose. In that tacky dining room, with its gaudy chandelier and suffocating small talk, I'd never felt freer. After all, there's no place like my own new home, however small, and on the other side of town it may be. The sharp scent of roasted chicken mingled with the tang of tension in the air. The dining room felt smaller with every word Linda spat out. "And tomorrow," Linda said, her cheeks flushed the same shade as the wine in her glass, "I'm calling Mark. You'll be out of a job before you can say unemployment." Everyone at the table heard the scrape of a knife against a plate as Jeremy cut into his chicken a little too forcefully. The sound rang out like an alarm, but I couldn't help it. I started laughing. It bubbled out uncontrollably, absurd against the backdrop of Linda's scowl. "What's so funny?" Linda practically hissed, her fork hovering midair. Jeremy's eyes were wide like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The room went still, ready for the drama to explode. I straightened up, wiping the corner of my eye, still chuckling. "You two," I said, shaking my head. "You don't know the half of it." Their gazes were like hooks, waiting for the punchline. 4 months ago, I landed a new job, head of a department at a big trading company. Paychecks double what I used to make. Silence slammed into the room. Linda's fork dropped with a clatter, but it was Jeremy's face I savored. The mix of horror and envy was almost delicious. "No," Jeremy finally muttered, his voice a mix of disbelief and resentment. "Yep," I said, popping the P like bubblegum. And as for calling in favors, I don't need your connections anymore, Linda." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. "That'll be the movers," I said, shoving my chair back. The screech of its legs against the floor was a fitting soundtrack to Linda's dropped jaw. I sauntered to the door, heart pounding but feeling free. Opening it, there they were, two burly guys with Hank's Moving Company stitched on their caps. "We're here for your stuff," one of them said, more stating than questioning. "Yep, everything that belongs to me, I acquired even before I got involved with my hubby," I said, hitching a thumb toward the dining room where my soon-to-be ex-life was crumbling. The movers shrugged and shuffled by, heading straight for the dining room. Their heavy boots thudded on the hardwood, each step a nail in the coffin of this uncomfortable evening. Linda was standing now, her napkin forgotten on her plate. "You can't do this," she said, but the bite was gone from her voice. "Oh, but I am." There was a sense of joy saying that out loud, watching her struggle for words. Jeremy was hunched at the table, his face buried in his palms, the lines of his back tight like a drawn bow. "Come on, don't do this. Not the sofa. Remember our movie nights." His voice was a soft plea, a distant echo from a time that felt like a different life. I shook my head firmly. "The sofa's mine. Jay bought it with my own cash, and you know it." Turning to the movers, I pointed at the bulky behemoth of a couch. "That thing needs to go first. Careful with it. It's pricier than it looks." So sat frozen, her eyes wide like saucers. She looked like she wanted to melt into the woodwork. Linda was still shaking her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're cleaning us out, girl. What are we supposed to sit on?" "The floor." Should have thought of that before Jeremy decided to play house with Miss Sunshine here. I didn't bother hiding the bitterness as I swept my hand toward Zoe. The movers were a symphony of grunts and commands, hefting up my furniture with practiced ease. The TV came off the wall with a pop. The dining table was dismantled with a clatter, and even the Dan washing machine was unhooked with a series of clangs and splashes. Jeremy finally stood up, pushing away from the table. "You think you've won." His voice wobbled with anger, his nostrils flaring. "Checkmate," I quipped, heading back towards the kitchen. Plates of uneaten food gazed up at me as I grabbed a bottle of soda, popping the cap and taking a swig. It wasn't champagne, but the fizz tasted like victory. The movers began hauling boxes, the heavy sound of cardboard thumping against the front door as they passed in and out. I walked back into the dining room, grabbing a few last personal items, a picture frame, a ceramic hat Jeremy always hated, and my favorite mug. All right, but the car too." Jeremy stood up, his face flushed a deep red. "You can't be serious. How am I supposed to get to work?" I fished the car keys from my pocket, twirling them around my finger. "You should have read the fine print. Baby, that car's in my name." I tossed the keys to one of the movers. "Park it outside my new place, will you?" By the time we were done, the house was as bare as a skeleton, stripped clean. Linda sat on the hardwood floor, her back against the wall, while Jeremy stared at the gaping space where the TV used to be. Before I turned to leave, I took one last look at the shell of our shared past. "You should thank me, really. It's not every day you get a fresh start free from all the old junk." Linda was fuming, her hands clenching and unclenching. "You're nothing without this family." She spat, every word a poison dart, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I looked at her, at Jeremy, at the life I was leaving behind. Jeremy watched me, his chest heaving like he was running out of air. Greed, anger, regret, they were written all over him. Even as I turned my back on that chapter, I knew I would never forget that look. Escaping the clamor of Jeremy's house, I breathed deeply. The cool air was a slap to my skin, a wake-up call. I was free, but Jeremy wasn't going to let go without a fight. "You think you've won, huh?" Jeremy's voice came from behind the door. "You'll regret this. Mark my words, you'll end up just an old hag with a bunch of cats." I could hear the anger boiling in his veins, but I didn't care. Done was done, and I was out of there. I was nearly at my car when the front door burst open again. There was Jeremy, red-faced and pompous. "You know I've got Zoe now. She's half your age and twice as hot." His barb was meant to wound, but it missed its mark because right then Zoe herself appeared, flinging Jeremy's arm off her like it was a filthy rag. "Keep dreaming, Jade," she snapped. She didn't even glance my way as she stumped down the steps, fury in her heels. She was done playing the pretty little girlfriend prop. Jeremy stumbled after her like a man who'd just been kicked in the gut. "Zoe, babe, don't be like that. Come on." But Zoe spun around, and the look she shot him would have curdled milk. "Like what, Jeremy? Like someone who just saw the light? You're a jerk, and your mama's a dictator in a floral apron. I ain't marrying into this circus." The color drained from Jeremy's face quicker than a leak in a balloon. He spluttered, "No comebacks, no charm. This is it, Jeremy. We are done." Zoe's words were like nails in a coffin, precise and final. Jeremy's mother, Linda, had appeared in the doorway, too, her face twisted like she'd swallowed something nasty. "Zoe, you can't leave my boy. We had plans for you," she hissed, probably thinking of wedding bells and grandkids. But Zoe wasn't having any of it. I said, "I'm done. Go find another puppet for your little show." She stormed off, her heels clicking like a ticking time bomb. I leaned against my car, trying real hard not to let the grin split my face. Watching Jeremy and Linda shrink in the rearview mirror felt better than I'd imagined. "Hey, and don't think you've gotten away with this." Jeremy was shouting, but his words were like rain against my car window, persistent but insignificant. I rolled down the window a sliver, just enough to let my voice carry. "Actually, I think I just did." I gave him a look that said I knew I'd won, then rolled the window back up before he could spew another word. I hit the gas and didn't look back. In my rear view, Jeremy's figure got smaller, his rage drowned out by the growl of the engine. Ahead of me, the street stretched out, the night just beginning to shimmer with possibilities. Looking at the empty seat next to me, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of something like triumph, sweet and raw. No regrets, no looking back. I mused. Tonight, the getaway was all the dinner I needed. The next morning, my phone buzzed. The last name I expected to see was Zoe's. My lips curled into a smug grin. I swiped at the screen. "Hey, Zoe." "Hey, it's me. Just thought I'd ring you up, to say thanks." Her voice chirped through. "For what?" I leaned back on my kitchen counter, a little confused but curious. "For yesterday. You were freaking badass, opening my eyes about Jeremy and Linda." "Ah, that." I laughed. It was a cold laugh, no joy in it. "Trust me, I didn't do anything. You saw them for what they are all on your own." "Yeah, well, I just wanted to say I appreciate it. So thank you," she insisted. I could hear the genuine tone in her voice. "No problem. Just watch your back, okay?" We said our goodbyes and hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I tacked it against my chin, pondering the weirdness of it all. I had just been thanked by the woman who was fooling around with my ex-husband for helping her dodge a bullet. Life sure was strange. I mulled over my conversation with Zoe while I threw together a sandwich, the heel of the bread, some old cheese, and that last sorry slice of ham. I wasn't in the mood for anything fancy. I slumped down at my tiny kitchen table, taking a bite out of the uneven sandwich. I chewed slowly, the bread dry and sticking to the roof of my mouth. That could have been me, stuck in that cycle with Jeremy and Linda. But it wasn't. I had broken free. Later that day, I sat down with a pen and a notepad. I was old school like that. A thank you note. Never thought I'd write one of those to my ex's side chick, but here we were. I scribbled quickly, not fussing over the words, just letting them spill out raw. I told Zoe she was welcome, that she was better off now, even if it didn't seem like it yet. I told her to keep her head high and to never let some two-timing jerk and his manipulative mom tell her who she was. I signed it simply, with no flares or niceties. The note was brief and to the point. It was enough. I sealed it in an old envelope I found in a drawer, grabbed my keys, and headed out. I dropped the letter in the mailbox. No need for a face-to-face. The words said it all. Walking back to my apartment, I kicked at a stray pebble. Life had given me lemons, and I didn't make lemonade. I threw those lemons back hard. Now I was helping others do the same. I'd made peace with my past, with Jeremy, and surprisingly, with So, too. The world kept turning, bizarre as it was, but at least for today, it was turning in my favor. The lawyer had one of those smirks when he handed me the last paper. "It's all yours now," he said, loud enough for Jeremy to hear across the room. "Nice doing business with you," I said, rolling my eyes a bit as I took the paperwork. The ink felt fresh and symbolic, the full stop at the end of a long, drag-it-out story. Jeremy didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking like someone had taken the ground out from under him, probably realizing his mom's plan had backfired. Linda had a face like thunder, her lips thin like she'd been sucking on lemons. "Can you believe this, after everything I did?" Linda's voice trailed off into a sort of hiss. I didn't answer, just clutched my papers a bit tighter as I walked out of the court building and into my little car. That old thing that survived the marriage far better than I did. I caught Linda's eye. She was staring at me from her big shiny car, probably feeling her age and her mistakes. "You got what you wanted, huh?" Jeremy puffed out as he caught up with me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders hunched. I turned to him, the feeling of being finally free making me bold. "No, Jeremy, I got what I deserved. There's a difference." My phone beeped. A message from Stella, a friend who'd stuck by me like glue. "Drinks tonight." I couldn't help but smile. Stella got it. "Hell yes," I texted back as I slipped into the driver's seat. There was a quiet, not the uneasy quiet like at Jeremy's place, but the kind that lets you hear yourself think. As the engine came to life with a familiar rattle, I felt something twist in my stomach, excitement, nerves. My new home felt different now. I stepped inside, the echo of my footsteps the only welcome, but it was enough. My eyes roamed over the place. It was a mess of boxes and furniture that had seen better days, but it was mine. I spent the next few hours moving stuff around, unpacking, and tossing what I didn't need. I made room, my room, a space that felt more like me by the minute. The next day, I drove to work. Work was the kind of busy that kept thoughts at bay and made the day fly by. At lunch, the girls were all ears. "You okay, Jess?" the office gossip asked, her eyes all concern and curiosity. "Better than okay," I answered, with no shadow of a lie. The drive home was meditative. The road stretched like my future. Uncertain, yeah, but mine all the same. That night Stella and I hit the bar. It was loud and full, just like life should be. We tossed back drinks and threw our heads back with laughter that drew looks. "To new beginnings," Stella said, holding up her glass. "To tomorrow," I replied, and we drank to that. To tomorrow and the day after, and all the days to follow. Because that's the thing about tomorrow. It's always on its way. And now, so was I ready for whatever the hell it decided to bring.
"Landon, you need to see this. Now." Mara's panicked voice pierced the silence of my morning routine. I froze, my spoonful of Cheerios hovering halfway between the bowl and my mouth. Mara was my neighbor, and while we were friendly, her barging unannounced into my home was unusual, to say the least. I sprang up from the kitchen island, my unease growing. "Mara, what's going on?" She gestured wildly. "It's Landon. I just went over to borrow some sugar, and he's on the floor, and—" I didn't wait for her to finish. I shoved past her, and raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. My mind reeled. Landon prone on the floor. Why was Mara even over here so early? Dread pooled in my stomach as terrifying possibilities flooded my thoughts. I skidded into our bedroom, my breath catching at the sight of my husband sprawled motionless on the carpet. Landon. Kneeling, I gripped his shoulders, giving him a shake, eliciting only a faint moan. Relief washed over me. At least he was alive. I whipped around to face Mara, who hovered nervously in the doorway. "Did you call 911? She shook her head mutely. "Well, call them," I snapped, "and get me a cold cloth for his forehead." I turned my attention back to Landon, tapping his face gently. "Landon, can you hear me? Everything is going to be okay." Everything was definitely not okay. My mind reeled as I tried assessing what happened. Landon had seemed perfectly normal when he kissed me goodbye not even an hour earlier. And now here he was, unconscious. I racked my brain, trying to remember if he'd complained of any symptoms lately. He'd seemed a little more tired and distracted the past few weeks, but I'd chalked it up to his demanding work schedule. Guilt twisted my insides. Had I missed something crucial? I smoothed Landon's hair back from his clammy forehead, willing him to open his eyes, to say something. In the distance, I heard the wail of an approaching siren. Thank God the paramedics were almost here. Mara rushed back in with a wet towel, her face pinched with worry. As I laid the cool cloth on Landon's head, a tiny flare of suspicion caught in my mind. How had Mara even found Landon? She said she came over to borrow sugar, but I knew for a fact we were out. I made a mental note to question her more later. The paramedics arriving halted that train of thought. I moved back to let them work, firing off answers to their rapid queries. No serious prior medical issues. No complaints of pain recently. Yes, he seems overworked and exhausted. I stared helplessly as they loaded Landon's limp form onto a stretcher. One EMT turned to me, her expression kind but serious. "We're taking him to County Memorial. It seems he possibly had a minor heart episode or stroke. We won't know more until we run some tests." I swallowed hard, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I felt Mara come up beside me. "Bryn, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I know this is beyond shocking. Do you want me to call anyone for you?" I shook my head, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. "No, I need to make those calls myself, starting with his office." I attempted a grateful look. "But thank you for finding him. If you hadn't come over..." I let the sentence trail off, an icy shiver run down my spine at the implication. She put a consoling hand on my shoulder. "Of course, let me know if you need anything at all." I offered a weak smile before going to make the necessary calls, questions about Mara still needling my brain. But first, I needed to get to the hospital and pray my husband of 15 years would be okay. Sitting in the too-bright hospital room, I watched Landon sleep. The steady beep of the heart monitor the only sound breaking the heavy silence. He looked diminished somehow, lying there pale against the starched sheets, a tangle of wires and tubes connecting him to various machines. The doctors said he'd had a minor heart attack, likely brought on by stress and lack of self-care. He was lucky to be alive and should make a full recovery, but it would be a long road ahead. My relief at his prognosis was tempered by anger that he had let himself get to this point. And then there was the question of Mara and her suspicious timing in supposedly finding him. My head throbbed trying to make sense of it all. A soft rap at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see Mara peeking her head in, a vase of flowers in her hands. "Hey, I didn't want to disturb you, but I wanted to drop these off for Landon." I forced a polite smile. "You're too kind. More flowers couldn't hurt in this dreary place." I gestured for her to place the arrangement on the windowsill before an awkward beat passed between us. Clearing my throat, I broke the silence first. "So, the doctors seem confident he'll recover in a few weeks." Mara's face flooded with relief as she settled into the chair next to me. "Oh, thank goodness. I've just been so worried, replaying it all in my mind. I mean, what if I hadn't randomly decided I needed to borrow sugar at that exact moment? It doesn't bear thinking about." She trailed off, absent-mindedly fidgeting with the handle of her purse. I stiffened, that nagging flare of doubt rekindled by her words. Our houses shared a backyard fence. She wouldn't have been able to see Landon collapse through a window or door. The only logical way she could have happened upon the scene was if she was already inside our home. I studied her carefully, noticing the way she avoided eye contact, focusing intently on her hands. Was it guilt I detected in her body language, or simple distress over the situation? Mara stood abruptly, breaking me from my scrutinizing reverie. "Well, I should get out of your hair, let you have some time alone with him." She stepped over to give my shoulder a brief, awkward pat. "Call if you need anything, okay?" I walked her to the door, my suspicions solidifying into resolve. As unsettled as I felt over the many unanswered questions, I knew now wasn't the time to confront her, not while Landon's condition remained uncertain. But the moment he was cleared to come home safely, I would get to the bottom of Mara's bizarre behavior. I was through with politely ignoring the signs something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and home, maintaining an exhausting vigil over Landon's recovery. My parents flew in from Florida to offer their support, giving me both moral support and a break from the endless hospital stays. Landon's progress was slow but steady, until late one week when his doctor finally gave clearance for him to finish recuperating at home. My parents departed back south, with firm instructions for me to call if I needed anything else. The morning after I got Landon settled in at home, I steeled myself and marched over to Mara's place, determined to get answers. When she opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. "Bryn, I didn't know you were stopping by." I folded my arms across my chest, fixing her with an even look. "We need to talk. Now." Mara paled slightly but stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. I crossed the threshold, setting the stage for a long overdue confrontation. I sat ramrod straight on Mara's plush white couch, clutching my cell phone like a lifeline. She settled into the armchair adjacent, her eyes wary. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked with forced brightness. I shook my head curtly. "No, I'm here for answers." Mara smoothed her hair back, letting out a nervous titter. "Answers? About what?" My eyes narrowed, honing in on her discomfort. "Let's start with how exactly you happened to find my husband unconscious. Want to run that by me again?" Mara looked down, picking at a thread on her jeans. "Well, like I told you, I came over to borrow something. I noticed the front door was ajar, which was unusual, so I went inside to check if everything was okay. That's when I found Landon passed out." I let out a harsh scoff. "That's quite the revised history, Mara. Because when you first told me about it at the house, you distinctly said you came over for sugar." I leaned forward. "We both know I didn't have any sugar for you to borrow. So what's the real story?" Her eyes flashed with what looked like anger before being quickly replaced with faux confusion. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Bryn," she said carefully. "It was a traumatic morning. I must have misremembered the exact details." We sat in tense silence, both refusing to break eye contact first. I decided to switch tactics. "You mentioned the other day at the hospital how lucky it was you happened to randomly decide to come over when you did, but considering the state of my front door, it's pretty clear the timing wasn't just coincidence. Was it, Mara?" Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, cheeks reddening. I pressed on, urgency creeping into my voice. "He's my husband. I deserve the truth. What is going on between you two?" Abruptly, Mara stood. "I think you should leave now." Her voice was cold, all pretense vanishing. I followed suit, refusing to be deterred. "Not until you start being honest. I'm no fool. I know something is happening behind my back." My voice broke on the last word. Mara stepped closer, rage twisting her features. "Careful, Bryn," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're starting by making wild accusations. Some things are better left alone." I reeled back. Was that a threat? Before I could respond, Mara yanked open the front door. "I believe it's time for you to go," she said icily. Temporarily speechless, I allowed myself to be herded outside. Mara's ominous words echoed in my ears as she slammed the door in my face. I stood frozen on the steps for several long beats, shaking with a melange of emotions, confusion, anger, hurt. It was painfully clear Mara was tangled up with Landon in some capacity. Her hostile reaction had only amplified my worst fears. By the time I got back home, steely determination had eclipsed the stunned hurt I initially felt. I knew now I couldn't rely on either Mara or Landon to give me the whole truth willingly about whatever was between them. Fortunately, I still had one ace up my sleeve, someone who could help me expose the rot at the core of my marriage, a private investigator. After witnessing Mara's volatile response up close, I no longer cared if drastic measures were required. One way or another, I was getting the proof I needed to force Mara and Landon's deceit into the harsh light. I opened my laptop, hands steady as I searched for the best investigator money could buy. I drummed my fingers on my desk, hitting refresh on my email for the 10th time in as many minutes. I was awaiting the preliminary report from Mick Walsh, the private investigator I hired a week prior, anxious to see if he uncovered any substantial evidence of Landon's duplicity. My knee bounced with nervous energy as I once again scanned through my inbox. Finally, a new message appeared at the top, Mick's name flashing in bold. Taking a deep breath to steel my nerves, I clicked it open. My eyes raced across the page, hands beginning to tremble halfway through digesting the attached photos and Mick's analysis. It was worse than I thought. Apparently, Landon and Mara's trysts had started over 6 months ago. My mind reeled as I examined photo after photo of them ducking into seedy motels, kissing on park benches, and holding hands during intimate restaurant meals. Acid roiled in my stomach at the realization that Landon hadn't just cheated, he was living a completely separate life with Mara behind my back. I shoved my chair back from the desk, bile rising in my throat. I barely made it to the bathroom before I lost the meager contents of my stomach. Gripping the toilet seat until my knuckles turned white, guttural sobs racked through me. Through the echoing anguish in my ears, one thought broke through the torrential hurt. I wanted revenge. No, I corrected myself. I deserved revenge. Splashing icy water on my face, I regarded my reflection in the mirror. The shell shock was gone, replaced by icy determination. I knew then I wouldn't be satisfied with simply confronting Landon over his betrayal. I wanted consequences. Steep, life-altering consequences not just for him, but for Mara too. I wanted them humiliated, ostracized from their social circles and careers. Proof of their lies made public for all to see. The Altoids website said revenge was best served cold. Well, Mara and Landon were about to experience my icy vengeance firsthand. My mind whirled as I began meticulously plotting each step, moving into a calculated chess match I intended to win at all costs. First, I texted Mara from Landon's phone, requesting she come over the next day to talk. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the bait. Next, I drafted an email to our entire neighborhood watch group, emphasizing that Mara and my husband had urgent news to share with all at the community park tomorrow evening. The neighbors would be surprised, but they were sure to spread the word like wildfire. Finally, I scheduled a morning meeting with my lawyer. While I didn't plan on immediately filing divorce papers, I wanted my options mapped out ahead of time before dropping the bomb on Landon. Satisfied I had set all the necessary groundwork, I poured myself a large glass of wine and retreated to the guest bedroom. I refused to sleep another night in the bed Landon had callously defiled. Swirling the crimson liquid, I allowed myself a small smile. Let Mara and Landon enjoy their last evening together before their world imploded. Tomorrow I was dragging their lies into the disinfecting sunlight for everyone to see. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, energized by the promise of redemption. I awoke well before dawn, adrenaline already thrumming through my veins. Today was the day I would finally expose Landon and Mara's betrayal after weeks of secrecy and lies. I dressed methodically, donning an outfit that presented strength and confidence. I needed to project control and power when I confronted them. In the muted early morning light, I found myself gazing around the home Landon and I had shared for over a decade, seeing it with new eyes. I trailed my fingers over the wedding photo on the fireplace mantel, 2 smiling strangers frozen in time, blissfully unaware of the future wreckage of their vows. Bile rose in my throat as I now noticed other traces of Mara peppered throughout the house. The throw pillow she gifted us last Christmas, the botanical calendar from her small business posted in the kitchen. Proof she had seamlessly infiltrated the inner sanctum of my home and marriage for months without my knowledge. Well, it ended today. I finished my coffee, relieved to hear Landon stirring upstairs, readying himself for the ambush ahead. The doorbell rang right on schedule at 9 a.m. sharp. I opened it to find Mara on the doorstep, concern etched on her face that I knew now was just a facade. "Bryn, is everything okay?" Landon's text had me worried. She tried peering around me. "Is he here?" I stepped aside in cold silence, allowing her entry as I sent the pre-written text instructing the neighborhood watch members to gather at the park at noon. I wanted an audience for the final act. Mara perched awkwardly on the couch while I informed Landon he had a visitor. He came trotting eagerly down the stairs, but pulled up short at the sight of me standing rigidly behind a confused-looking Mara. I broke the tension, keeping my voice neutral and calm. "Well, isn't this cozy? My husband and his mistress chatting over morning coffee." Mara leapt up as Landon spluttered. "Bryn, it's not what you think." His eyes were wide with panic. I held up a hand. "Save it. I know everything, have proof of it all, photos, dates, the whole sordid timeline, so you can drop the Wounded Confusion Act." "You crazy bitch," Mara seethed, posture taut like a snake about to strike. "I told you to leave this alone. Now you've ruined everything." I let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Oh, I've ruined everything? That's rich, coming from the backstabbing harlot sleeping with my husband." Mara lunged forward, but I didn't flinch. "Listen very carefully. You both have 5 minutes to get out of my sight, because in less than an hour you're going to admit publicly everything you've done." I smiled coldly. "Don't worry, I've invited all the neighbors over already." Ignoring their spluttering protests, I turned on my heel and strode away, pausing at the doorway. I'd use this time wisely to start coming up with one hell of an apology. I left them standing slack-jawed amidst the rubble of their lies. Soon, everyone would know the truth. Justice was at hand. The sunny afternoon air felt sharp and brittle against my skin as I approached the neighborhood park. I spotted many familiar faces milling about, checking phones and murmuring with confusion about the urgent summons. Good, word had spread quickly. I climbed atop the picnic table at the front, clearing my throat loudly. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know you're wondering what this is about." I paused, pulse thundering in my ears. "I've asked you here because my husband and neighbor have an important announcement regarding their relationship." I stepped back as nervous whispers rippled through the crowd. Right on cue, Mara and Landon rounded the corner, arm in arm. I watched impassively as they took in the scene before them, dozens of pairs of eyes staring, rapt with attention. Landon dropped Mara's arm like she was on fire, taking a half step away from her. "Bryn, what the hell is going on?" he hissed under his breath. Ignoring him, I smiled icily at the gathering. "Go ahead, you two. The floor is yours." Mara looked wildly between the staring faces and me, hatred in her gaze. I met it coolly, arms folded in front of me, refusing to let my smile drop. Her shoulders slumped slightly as the defiance seeped from her frame at seeing the undeniable proof rimming her in on all sides. Her voice came out hoarse when she finally found it. "Fine, Bryn, you win." She wrung her hands, words directed at the ground. "Landon and I have been seeing each other romantically behind Bryn's back for several months now." A collective gasp arose from the crowd. My triumph only grew as Mara glanced again at the crowd's disgusted faces. I raised a brow, prompting her to continue. I knew he was married, but I didn't care, and he pursued me relentlessly until I gave in." At this, Landon made a small strangling sound, but I silenced him with a quelling glare. Mara pressed a hand to her cheek, but forced herself to meet the eyes boring into her. "Our affair has completely betrayed Bryn's trust. I'm ashamed of my behavior." Her voice dropped to a tortured whisper. "I'm so very sorry." The ladies in the group immediately clustered around me, murmuring words of sympathy and support. I accepted their comfort graciously, keeping my gaze fixed on Mara and Landon's slumped forms standing alone amidst the recriminations swirling around them. The consequences were only just beginning for those two. As the afternoon stretched on, Mara's business partner and close friend cornered me, disgust etched on her face. "Bryn, I had no idea about Mara's behavior, but it's completely unacceptable. Consider her business partnership with me dissolved effective immediately." I graciously accepted her heartfelt apology on behalf of Mara's actions. As I watched her walk away to inform Mara, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. My plan was working perfectly. Mara and Landon's lies were exposed to everyone they cared about, with professional and social consequences already piling up. The best revenge truly was living well. and I was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched with satisfaction as Mara and Landon's world steadily crumbled around them. True to her word, Mara's business partner dropped her. She had to close her fledgling soap company as key clients and corporate sponsors pulled out. Horrified by the social media fallout surrounding her now very public affair. Internet support swelled for me, as people praised my courage in dragging her deceit into the light. And while I fielded calls from sponsors willing to provide aid, Mara remained in a fierce downward spiral. Her formerly glossy social channels were flooded with hate and criticisms decrying her manipulative personality. For Landon, the professional retribution took longer, as many of us clients were tied to lengthy contracts with his firm. But small signs of demise showed: critical online reviews, a slow drop-off of calls for new properties. Then finally, blessedly, 2 of his largest clients sent termination letters, citing his profound personal lapse in moral judgment. I celebrated his misery from my guest room sanctuary, grateful I still had legal right to remain in our shared home through the divorce proceedings. Our relationship grew beyond frigid interactions limited to curt, mechanical conversations regarding household affairs. During one such exchange, Landon clenched his fists at his sides. "Bryn, this is madness. You've taken it too far. Mara and I's jobs," I cut him off coolly. "Landon, you lost the moral high ground when you cheated on your wife for half a year. You're simply experiencing the consequences." Ignoring his outraged spluttering, I continued. "I met with my lawyer and drew up a settlement agreement. You'll receive 30% of assets and forfeit our shared real estate commissions and equity." Landon gaped like a fish struggling for air. "You can't just change our prenup like that," I laughed sharply. "Oh, I most certainly can in cases of adultery with legal proof." I fixed him with a steely gaze. "You're getting off easy. I suggest signing without further argument." Landon looked ready to spontaneously combust for several seconds before slumping in defeat. "You're a vindictive, soulless shrew," he whispered harshly. "You've ruined our futures over an affair." My eyes blazed with cold fire. "You want to lecture me about ruining futures and betrayal? How rich? I'm not the villain here. I just refuse to be your victim either." I shoved the thick envelope toward him. "Sign it or face a uglier, messier legal battle." After a long, seething beat of silence, he bitterly scrawled his name across the document, sealing his financial ruin. As I showed him the door, a profound wave of cathartic relief crashed over me. This painful chapter was finally closed for good. Later that night, as I opened a nice bottle of wine to celebrate a battle hard won, my phone rang with Mara's number flashing on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her words came out in broken half-sobs. "Why couldn't you just let it go, Bryn? Why did you have to destroy us so completely over one mistake?" I allowed myself one beat of delicious satisfaction, hearing her misery before I hung up without another word. I turned my phone off and raised my glass in a solitary toast to new beginnings. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. I stood in the entryway of my cozy new condo, hands on my hips as I surveyed the sleek space where I was starting fresh. The divorce was finalized last week, leaving me with complete ownership of this place all my own. Landon got the house, which needed extensive repairs anyway, and I received a sizable settlement after the kids and I sold it. I crossed to the balcony doors, smiling as I gazed out at the pleasing skyline view. It had been an emotionally tumultuous season, but with the hardest parts behind me, I finally allowed myself to relax into the next chapter. The private investigator I hired out of a mad rush to expose the affair had become a close confidant during the messy showdown and aftermath. Over enchiladas one warm evening, Mick made me a money-making offer to spin my story into a series for a local podcast network looking for gripping content. I jumped on it eagerly, not just for the paycheck, but because it proved the best revenge is indeed living well. Today marked the debut episode release featuring my recounting of the betrayal. My producer texted to say the analytics looked promising for solid listenership. I couldn't wait to finally give my side and relinquish the bitterness and pain that clung to me like cobwebs for so long. It was time to shake off the darkness of deception and walk freely into the light again. I spent the afternoon in a flurry of activity preparing to host a small listening gathering that evening in my new condo for the first episode's drop. My doorbell rang promptly at 6 o'clock, and I opened it to find Zoe, my closest girlfriend who stuck firmly by my side as an ally during the whole saga. Her compassionate strength provided a lifeline through many tearful nights. We hugged fiercely before she held me at arm's length, assessing me with a warm smile. "It's so wonderful to see that spark back in your eyes, Bryn. You look stunning as always, but now you're glowing from within again, too." I squeezed her hand, overcome with gratitude, as a few other dear friends arrived to show their support. We settled in the living room, with glasses of wine and snacks to listen. Their gasps and murmurs of outrage in all the right places brought a sense of deep comfort. I wasn't alone in this anymore. As the episode wrapped up with a preview for part 2, my circle of friends erupted into exuberant applause. I dabbed the corners of my eyes, unexpectedly overcome. Zoe stood, raising her glass. "To our amazing, courageous, justice-serving friend, Bryn. Not all heroes wear capes." Everyone echoed her sentiments as we clinked glasses. Zoe enveloped me in another fierce hug as the well wishes continued flowing. "I'm so proud of you for telling this story on your own terms. Now everyone will know the truth and the two dirtbags behind it all." I sighed contentedly, feeling lighter than I had in ages. The party and camaraderie flowed late into the evening before my guests trickled out with last hugs and promises to meet again soon. Alone again in my peaceful sanctuary of a home, I raised my glass in a private toast to living courageously after betrayal, and the joy of taking back my life on my own terms without apology. The long road here was worth every step.